Ecology is the study of interactions between organisms and the environment. At the outset of this video, what I want you to do is examine the two photographs before you and brainstorm some ideas that you have on how these organisms are interacting with each other. I want you to think about how they might have been interacting before the photo was taken, and I also want you to think about how they might interact with each other after this photo was taken. You can pause the video so that you can write down your ideas on a blank sheet of paper, and tomorrow in class we'll go through and talk about some of the ideas that you've generated. Now, in discussing how organisms interact with their environment, we also should recognize that some parts of this organism's environment might be living, and some parts of their environment would also be non-living. And so we call the living components of an environment the biotic components, and those would include things like predators or parasites. And there's also non-living components of the environment. These would be things like temperature or precipitation. What I'd like you to do at this point is go back to those original photos that we saw at the beginning of this video and identify on your same sheet of paper that you were brainstorming before some of the different things that you see in these photos that are living components and some of the things that we see in these photos that are non-living components. So these living and non-living components of an organism's environment are important because they can determine where in the world we would find an organism and how many of them we'll find in a given area. So for example, if we're looking on the far left side of the video, we see a map of Pakistan. And what this map is showing us is the range where we would find various species of mountain sheep. And what I want you to do is take a look at this map and notice that there are a few places where the range of these animals are not contiguous. So for example, if we look in the Quetta area, we notice that there are spaces between where we would potentially find this species of mountain sheep. And what I want you to do is come up with some ideas about what living or non-living factors might be preventing us from finding any one of these species in a given area. And specifically noting that in many of the cases, these sheep are not found, or there are populations that are not found directly next to each other. If you look on the right-hand side of this video, you'll see a map of Australia. And this map is showing us the concentrations of kangaroos. And so the darker areas of the map show us where there is more kangaroos per square kilometer, and the lighter area colors show us where there are lesser concentrations of kangaroos. What I want you to do is think about some of the living and non-living factors that might be influencing the concentrations of kangaroos in Australia. And as we've been doing throughout this video, make sure that you write some of those ideas down so that we can compare them with the rest of the class. Dispersion is talking about when an organism has a home range and it's moving outward. Sometimes when an organism moves out of its natural range, it's successful. And sometimes when it moves outside of its natural range, it's a failure. And so what I want you to do is choose a specific species and think about some areas where that species might be potentially successful if it moved into an area, and think about how if it moved into another area, it might potentially be unsuccessful. And so you can use the flow chart on the left-hand side to come up with some ideas about what are things that might limit the dispersal of an organism, what are some things that might help or aid an organism in its dispersal to find new areas. If you look at the right-hand side of the map, what you can see is a map showing the dispersal of the cane toad, which was an invasive species introduced to Australia almost a century ago. And the cane toad was introduced into Australia to basically control pests, to control insects. And what ended up happening was that the cane toad population exploded. And the reason for that was that in Australia, there was no natural predators to the cane toad. Things that might potentially eat the cane toad, like a dog or certain types of birds, when they would try and eat the cane toad, it would produce a toxic substance from a couple of glands on the back of its neck. And very quickly, these potential predators learned not to eat the cane toad and to avoid it. And so, without any predators, it's been basically free to eat whatever it wants. They have a voracious appetite. You can see cane toads eating uh, different animals that are its size. And it's actually quite funny to watch some videos of cane toads swallowing things that are quite big relative to its own size. And so this is an example of an invasive species that very quickly dispersed throughout Australia because it had all the things favoring its success and things that would make it very well adapted to its environment, and all the things that might possibly prevent the cane toad from moving to a new area, were just not there. Um, and so we'll leave it at that. That's the end of this introduction to ecology, and we'll move on to the next video here shortly.